100th anniversary of the Green Bay Packers this
I
year.
didn't even know it was the 100th. I was just in Wisconsin.
I'm here for you.
I'm a Bears fan.
Okay. So I know this will not last long because the Packers and the
Packers
Bears
are playing
play each other at 8:20, so we will be gone. I just want you to know, in case you're wondering, you're looking at your clock, you got your iPhone, you're wondering when is this going to end? It will end. So you're a cheesehead guy. I mean, aren't you?
I am.
Yeah. So speak up, speak in the mic.
Oh, yeah.
It's unaccustomed measure. What's your feeling about the Packers generally? I mean, what's your background there?
That's an embarrassing question. I'm a Packer fan, but that doesn't mean I'm much of a fan. I don't know what to say. I don't keep up with sports that much anyway, but if I'm a fan of anything, it's going to be the Packers. So yeah, that's about all I can say.
Very unimpressive.
Aaron Rodgers. So.
Yeah, very unimpressive.
Sorry.
Now, yeah, I noticed a lot of confessions here tonight. One is I was baptized in the Chandler Street Baptist Church, Hillcrest Baptist Church, and there's always been a very close relationship between that church and this church, and hence many reasons why I'm here as part of this. But I grew up in a time period of John Sonneson and Eldon Johnson, and there are certain memories I have of you, Bruce, Greg, your dad, as being perhaps the most competitive minister I've ever seen in my life. Can you give me a story that would indicate what that would be all about?
Well, he taught both of us how to play golf, and I remember playing with him all the time, and he was a good golfer. I don't remember really beating him many times.
We didn't beat him at all.
But he'd always, when he'd start playing, and he'd psych you out, that was the whole thing. But his thing was, he'd say, I don't practice, I pray. Those kind of lines when he sings a putt and things like that. So yeah, he was extremely competitive.
But he'd also always say, I shot at 82, but I should have shot at 77. Then we'd go through the whole deal of all the shots that he blew during the course of that round of golf. But he was a very good golfer, and he would yell at himself. He was not quiet on the golf course or on the badminton court or racquetball. Yeah, he'd whack you in the back as soon as you lose a point.
He's good at badminton.
Yes.
He was good at badminton also. Yeah, he won a couple city championships. So he told us, anyways. And his partner was Cy Goldman. So it was between the Jewish Temple and Zion Covenant Church. There was a little bond there between Cy Goldman and my dad. That they had some good times together, and we became good friends with their family.
Well, I remember watching something at the YMCA, and your dad was incredibly competitive. I don't think he ever crossed any language barrier, but it was very competitive. Sally, I got to ask a question of you, Sally. Sally was catty corner to when Cindy and I came back. We lived on Towner and Beachview, and you and Wes were right across. And do you have any stories about us as little kids, little young, growing up that we need to know about that might come up later today?
Oh, never.
I mean, you could, if it's nothing and you got something nice to say it real loud in the mic.
You were wonderful neighbors. And so was Alden and Rosemary and those two. And I remember Greg coming down the middle of the road on his unicycle, and I'll never forget it because he zigzagged across all the way down Beachview Avenue toward my house, and it was just fun to watch. I was the old lady watching out the window. Still is. You're supposed to be nice.
I like the style of this already. Maybe I don't know, I'm sure everybody knows who everybody is, but I think for the camera, why don't we start with you, Rick, and just explain who you are and kind of how you got connected into the Covenant Church.
So I'm Rick Miller, senior pastor here. Been here 9 years. I've been in the Covenant 25 years, and I don't even know what to say. I guess my story is similar to the Covenant. I came out of a Lutheran background, and you'll probably hear more about that later, but the Lutheran Church is the sort of the roots of the Covenant. So I guess that's all I need to say. Okay.
I'm Greg Johnson. Moved to Jamestown when I was 4 months old in 1961 with my mom and dad. My dad was called to the church with my brother Bruce here. Been a member the whole time. I spent a stint in Chicago went to North Park for 4 years and then stayed out there for 15 years and moved back and have been active here ever since.
Greg, where were you born?
I was born in Fitchburg, Massachusetts. and we moved here shortly thereafter.
So you have a little bit of Patriots roots, is that?
No, not really.
Bruce?
My name is Bruce Johnson. I'm the older brother of Greg. I was entering first grade when we came to Jamestown, when my dad was called here. My only recollection back then was the fact that when we lived for about 4.5 years in Massachusetts, and that was when I was between 1 and 5 years old, and that's where I learned to talk. So I had a very stiff New England accent and was teased by many of my friends here, and I lost that accent very quickly.
Well, Bruce, what's your mom and dad? Talk about that because there's so much a part of the church history. I had the pleasure of your filming your dad at an event with American Scandinavian Heritage, and he sort of went through his storyline, but maybe they don't know that. Could you give us a little Reader's Digest?
Of his
your
story?
Dad. Yeah.
He was born in Rockford, Illinois, and that's actually where the first church that he served was First Covenant in Rockford as an associate. I was born actually in Rockford as well, and then a year after I was born, he was called to the church in Fitchburg, and we stayed there for 4.5 years, until Zion called. We came here in 1961, and he was pastor here from 61 till 92 until he retired. And then he was the pastor emeritus for the emeritus disease that he called it.
They'd be interested in how your mom and dad met. He was a song leader and she was a pianist.
Maybe you better tell me.
I do remember.
I thought it was a Covenant Harbor Bible camp, but
No,
you tell
All
me.
right, Ralph, give us the skinny here.
I don't know just where it was, but I know that Eldon was the youth, in a conference. He was the youth pastor or something, and Rosemary was the pianist, and that's how they met. I remember Eldon telling about that. Well, I'm Ralph Johnson, another Johnson. We're not related, but I was brought to this church, the old church, as an infant, so this is where I've always attended. So.
And you met your wife here?
Pardon?
You met your wife here?
No, Carilyn, she was from First Methodist Church, the old First Methodist Church at the corner of 2nd and 3rd Street. That's where we were married, and it was kind of a little tension there at the beginning of our marriage as to which church we were going to go to. We thought it was all settled before we got married, but those things are easily said. And then when the first few church services she was at, she left in tears because it wasn't First Methodist. But she went to the minister, and he finally settled it. He says, I think it's payback time because there were 3 other members here that had gone over to First Methodist. So that was the first, really the biggest hump in our marriage.
Okay.
But we got it settled, and there's been no regrets.
Okay.
Greg, Ralph's left his mark on this building in many ways, but this decking, Ralph laid the decking that's up there on the roof. So.
My dad and I framed, the arches were up, they were standing, and my dad and I had the responsibility of putting all these purlins in and hooking all the parts together, and then we worked on putting the decking on the roof. So that was a kind of an interesting part, and something that I enjoyed working with Dad. So we put all of these purlins in, but the arches were already standing. So.
One of the nice things about this church in so many ways is your diversity, your way to inclusion, and obviously it's demonstrated the way you sat here up above. I see 4 men to the left, my left, 4 ladies to my right. I'll have you try to explain that later. Sally?
You're making me laugh. I was born...
Well, the Baptists in the old days, I don't think they were permitted to laugh, so this is a rare opportunity.
I was an import to Zion. I grew up in the Buffalo Covenant Church. And when I married Wes, we came here, naturally. And I've been here ever since. So I wasn't here in the very beginning, but I've loved this place. And my kids had really a hard time leaving it when they went on after they graduated college and had jobs and just they just always loved it. And then one thing I was talking to Chris on the phone. I can just remember her saying she was out in California at the time, and she was in a Covenant church there. But she said, "But there's no Eldon here, and there's no Rosemary here, and there's no Carilyn Johnson." She was in tears on the phone. So that's how much they love this place.
Talk about your father-in-law. He was the organist from the beginning of organs.
Do you want Cindy to tell you about it?
Either one.
Because that's his daughter.
Oh, okay.
Okay, you can do it, sis.
I loved it a lot.
Yeah.
Excuse me, my name is Cindy Holt. I've been a member of this church since Carol and I say we came in our mother's wombs. So I've been a member for a long, long time. My dad, Arthur Bornson, was the organist, but then all of a sudden he retired, so my dad took over.
Just temporarily.
Temporarily, and that lasted for 30 years. And he tried to retire 2 times. And the 3rd time he did, but Dad worked at the family company, Chall Lumber Company. He left for work like 5:30 or 6:30 in the morning, came home for supper, changed his clothes, and was usually down to church practicing, because when he took over, he was a pianist. He was not an organ player. So he was practicing, and then pretty soon he thought, this instrument is so great, I've got to take lessons. So once a month he went up to Buffalo to take lessons so that he would learn to really be able to play the organ the way it should. And I think he did a pretty good job. He had short, stubby fingers, and nobody could figure out how he ever played that like he did. But the nice part with my dad, he had a love affair with Rosemary. They were just absolutely a fantastic couple. Rosemary played the piano, and Dad, they did a lot of piano and organ duets. But then they put on a concert, and they were 2 pianos, and they were absolutely great. And the cutest story about Rosemary, after my dad had passed away, my niece Chris had foresaw in the future that this would not always be, and she put a tape together, or a CD, of one of their concerts, and many of their offerings for Easter was a fantastic book, piano and organ, with all the Easter hymns and Christmas, and she had that all on tape. Well, I was listening to it one Saturday, and I thought, oh, you know, if this was New York City, you'd pay a big buck to hear these 2 play. And so the next morning, the choir, I said to Rosemary, I was playing that tape of Dad and you, and I said, it's phenomenal. And she looked so, we were good, weren't we? And it was like, they just played, and Dad said, we even breathed together. They knew when one was going to stop and start. But I have to tell you, Reverend Sonneson and Pastor Ellen, he was competitive. And there was a Sunday school campaign week. Both the churches were trying to get the boost in their Sunday school, and I gotta win. Because if I don't, that old Sonneson's gonna wheel me around in a wheelbarrow. And so he wanted every Sunday school class to buff up and get more kids in there. But he was a great guy. He was our family doctor. He married Dick and I, and he was there for the birth of both our children. Sadly to say, he was the one who buried our little girl. But the cutest thing with Pastor Ellen, he came up to visit Joanne several times. And one day he was up there, and I said to Joanne, isn't this wonderful that Pastor Eldon came all his way to see you? And she just looked at him and she, but where's Rosemary? Rosemary was her Sunday school teacher. 2 days later, he came up and he had Rosemary.
Yeah.
That's the kind of pastor he was. So I said too much. Okay.
Well, you brought up an interesting one, that whole Sunday school
Campaign.
Yeah. Sanderson had me registered 3 different age groups.
So who wheeled the other one in the wheelbarrow? That was the thing.
Okay, sorry. Too much confession.
My name is Carilyn Wright. I've been in White Sunday since before we were born, and we have a lot more years than Greg does, believe me. I was born and bred in Zion. My folks were in Zion before they were married. And I have another story about Eldon, too, because my husband came from First Covenant. And he had done everything over there. He had taught Sunday school. He had been the basketball coach, all kinds of things. And when we were married, we would go one Sunday to First Covenant, one Sunday to Zion. This went on for 2.5 years until our son was born. Then we'd go 2 Sundays to Zion and 2 Sundays to First Covenant. And Eldon had been here a couple of years, and Sherwood was out front weeding one day. And he was down on his hands and knees, and along came Eldon down the road. I didn't know he was coming. And he walked up the walk, with this slow walk, and hey, Woody, and all this stuff, but they could have still commiserated a little bit. Finally, he says, what would it get you to come to Zion full time? And Sherwood says, get down on your knees and weep. So he was in a tie and a white shirt, and he got down on his knees, and he weeded. And then I gave him a cup of coffee because he'd done such a good job. So from then on, he and Woody were good friends. And Ellen was really, he was our pastor for many, many years, and he was special. But at Cindy's 50th reunion, or 50th anniversary, she didn't say this. Eldon and Rosemary were there, and how often you are married by the same person, and your kids are baptized, and then the same preacher is there for your 50th anniversary. It doesn't happen very often.
Hi, I'm Kathy Hall, and I represent the non-Swedish population of this church. Coming here about 35 years ago, I really didn't know the church very well, but my husband had gone to Sunday school here, and Pastor Eldon remembered him, remembered the family, was so warm and welcoming that it just was a no-brainer. I knew we'd end up here, even though we had gone to other churches to check them out. And it's been a wonderful thing being here, and I think I represent so many of you who have been here in the past 30 years, and hope maybe I can bring that perspective to the panel.
One of the things that clearly there was this sort of First Covenant, Zion Covenant decision-making at some point, which got, in the beginning, let's talk a little history. Who's going to be the history? Rick, are you the Covenant history person?
Only part of it. Which part do you want to know?
Well, in the beginning, there was a Covenant church here in Jamestown, which ultimately found a splinter. So
yeah, actually, in preparing for this whole evening, there was a part of Zion's story that I didn't know, and First Cov as well. We both started from a church in Bustye. There apparently was a Covenant church in Bustye, or a Swedish church in Bustye, I put it that way, a Swedish church in Bustye that decided to plant a church in Jamestown, and that is what is today First Cov, originally called, I think, just the Swedish Mission. And then we were a split off from what is today First Cov in 1894. And interestingly, if you go back at some of the early histories of this church, they consider the First Cov's church our first church. Which is just sort of funny, like it wasn't even like we left that church, it was just like that was our church. And then we moved across the street and planted another church, sort of claiming both as their own. And there's not, the story of the split is kind of murky. Apparently it was mostly over some disagreement about a pastor at the time, who, I'm not even sure what I should share because it really is honestly murky. Nobody really seems to know exactly what the story was. One of the issues was apparently that he wasn't very truthful. But the only evidence of that was that he had published something in the paper, advertising something in the church, and the date was wrong. And I'm serious. That's how petty it was. I mean, that was one of the issues, that he wasn't truthful. But there were some issues there that apparently, some disagreement about whether the pastor should be there or not. And that was partly, from what I understand, why folks left the church and started their own church. Now, there were enough Swedes coming to Jamestown at the time to warrant having two churches, and actually, many of the churches in Jamestown have Swedish roots. So that's.
So where was home one for the Zion Covenant, the first splintered church? Where was it located? Anybody know? Ralph, do you remember?
Ralph, you probably know.
The first church, they were down on Chandler Street. And in fact, when I was going into the service, I was on the train going to Lackland Air Force Base. The church burned at that particular time when I was on my way to Texas. And the fellow that we just went to his funeral yesterday down in Meadville, Bob Daniels, was a member of the church, and he got a hold of me and told me all about the burning of the church and what a disappointment it was. But it was down on Chandler Street, and down by First Lutheran, and there was just so many churches down. Epworth Methodist, the Swedish Baptist church was down there. It's the Unitarian Church, Zion Church, First Methodist, Congregational Church, Emmanuel Lutheran, First Baptist up the road a ways. There were so many churches. We could never be there these days without a big parking ramp. But in those days it was horse and buggy or streetcar, I would say.
So here we are at 520 Fairmont Avenue. You've been here for a while. Why was this selected?
We had a lot of proposals to add on to the old church. We had several architects rendering of how to increase the Sunday school space. We had plenty of space for the congregation. With the big balcony that we had, they could seat close to 1,000 people, I think. They were really forward in their thinking. But the school wanted the property. And so they were willing to give a good sum of money, and so we started looking for other places to build. And we ended up on Fairmont Avenue. And I just might add that when we moved onto this property, there was just loaded with trees, pine trees. And I know there was my dad and my brother Marvin and I came up here. We borrowed a chainsaw and we cut trees. We didn't have anything else to do at the time, and we didn't have any jobs to do, so we cut trees and got it ready for other people to help cut trees. But anyways, it was a big piece of property.
Did all that lumber go to Chall lumber? I just want to know.
I don't think so. I don't know what happened to it.
Chall lumber, tell me. So, when did you buy this land? When was this building built?
What's that?
When was this building built?
62.
62.
I was the second bride.
Second bride? Want to talk about your wedding?
No, not really.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, there was another couple that got married the week before us, and that I felt bad because she wanted to get married here only because she wanted to be the first bride, but they never came here after they went to, another church. So I was really the first bride.
First bride that hung around.
Yes, that hung around a long time, yes. But when they were building this church, it was so neat because the congregation, everybody did their part to raise money and working, and they did a lot of
Pardon, they made the drapes.
they made the drapes, yeah. Well, Harold Powers laid all the carpeting here, and he knew my wedding. I don't think the first bride had the carpet. I did. And
This really bothering you that you're not first among
all
equals.
my animosities are coming out. But anyhow, Harold was so cute that he saw me on Saturday before, or a Friday night, and he said, Cindy, I've been working so hard that I come in that front door, I feel like I should just fall on my knees. Because he was doing it all by hand. But anyhow, the church was ready, as well as it could be. And you know, it's beautiful. This is, well, Church Zion has been my home away from home. You know, that's, when we were growing up, I think most everybody here, and I know, Greg, you probably felt the same way with your mom and dad. Your church was your second home away from home. And so it's, you go through a lot of changes, but you gotta go with that.
Kill it.
Anyhow.
One thing we were able to do with Russ being the organist was he always knew when the weddings were. And so Cindy and I would go down on a Saturday afternoon, and that was our entertainment. We would sit up the balcony of the old church, and we would attend every wedding that Zion had for probably 4 or 5 years. We never got invited to the reception, though.
Yeah, we were also the silent guests.
So has this been bothering you also? You know, I think there's a therapy session in all of this.
What we did not want at our weddings. I have to tell you a little bit about the first church, the one we were down on, no, it wasn't Chandler.
The first. Are you that old? Remember the very? Oh, you mean that?
College Street. Okay. When they first bought the land, there was a house on it, but the house was up towards 2nd Street, so they built on the vacant land down below. The gentleman, all over the church, dug this basement by hand. They started in October. They finished and moved in, like in February, into the basement for their services. And by the next year, they had the rest of the church done. And most of it was done by just volunteer work. When they had their Sunday school, we were talking about having, trying to make money for the Sunday school, they passed around a little bank. And you were supposed to put 10 cents in the bank. And if you had $2, and it was collected by someone who comes around your house and pick up the $2. So that's the way they made money. One of the gentlemen, Dave Venberg, had been to a household sale. And he found one of those banks. And we have it upstairs in the Heritage Room. And that came from probably about the end of 1920s, right, 1930, right in there. So that's a treasure.
They mortgaged their homes too.
Oh yeah, they mortgaged their homes.
Pay for the church.
They did everything. There's a quote up in the Heritage Room that's the ladies of the church would sell names for 10 cents, and then they would embroider the name on the quilt. And there's 2,300 and some names on that quilt. They were embroidered by the ladies, and then they put the squares together, and then they had the quilt. But it was just a bed cover that's hanging up there. There's a lot of history. We are going to put the history on the website. And, aren't we, Jay? And it will have pictures, too, of the old church and the first 2 churches that they built when we were with First Covenant. They were very interesting. One was way down in Brooklyn Square, and the second one they built on the corner of Chandler and Foote Avenue, and they just built the first floor. And within a couple of years, they had put a balcony in it. And so they raised money. They asked for a retirement offering, whatever you call it, when you leave this sanctuary on Sunday. And they asked for $500. They got $800. And that was in 1890s. That's a lot of money to pick up.
Let me ask a question, because this was a Chandler Street Baptist, which is my roots. Swedish, I don't remember, but Swedish was clearly the only language preached at the church. Do you have any recollections of the Swedish language being part of the church service?
I do. I think I lived during the transition between the Swedish and the English. And I can remember at business meetings, they were trying to decide whether they should have a Swedish service once a quarter, maybe twice a month or something. They were trying to figure out what kind of a schedule that they should because it was when the Swedes were passing away, and it was getting to be mostly English. So I did live through that, but I remember Dad was an usher, and the three boys, Don, Paul, and myself, we would sit back in there where the ushers used to sit, and I listened to an awful lot of Swedish sermons, and I didn't, but Mom and Dad were immigrants, and so I did know some Swedish, and I learned Swedish, and Carolyn's mom and dad were Swedish immigrants, and so we've tried to keep it alive between the two of us a little bit, just kind of clowning around. The other day I was listening, we were talking about creation, I guess, and I said, you know what the Swedish word for create is? And she said, no, I don't think so. And I said, it just came into my mind, it was skapa. And so she said, where'd you get that one? I said, I don't know, it just came to my mind. I said, look, we'll look it up in the dictionary. We got home and looked it up, and it was right, skapa, and created is skapad. And so some of those things that keep creeping into my mind from time to time, that we're, somehow they got back in there. Don't use them very often,
But ultimately, the time had to come, decision was made to abandon it. The Swedish services, Swedish language services.
Yeah, the Swedish, enough of them, most of them passed away, and so it just went switched over to English. And other times they would have the Swedish service maybe downstairs and the English service upstairs. This is the old church. So they would do it that way. Reverend Palmgren was the last one to speak Swedish. After let's see, my brother Don he was confirmed by Reverend Gerhard Palmgren. And by the way, he had translated a lot of the Swedish hymns, and in our hymn book you'll find some names at the bottom by Reverend Palmgren. That was him. The next one was Gordon Nelson. He was the pastor when I was confirmed, and that was in 1942. So.
Then, it's a Swedish church. I mean, it's a Swedish-based church. At some point, do you recall, and this is an open question, at some point somebody who was non-Swedish sort of showed up one day. What was the reaction?
Well, I remember Pastor Alden saying, because when we had the pictorial directory, there were so many Johnsons, Petersons, Carlsons, Larsons, but I remember Pastor Alden saying, have you looked in the new one, our new directory? The first name is Agnello. And he was really proud of that we branched out and opened up our arms to somebody else. So,
Well, it had to be a conscious decision, obviously, to become more community broad-based, to be more representative of that. Has that been a constant theme of the church here, the Zion Covenant Church, as far as just broad-based beyond just a Swedish organization? All of a sudden you went from Italian, I know, to all of a sudden you try to diversify. I'm just curious about the stress and strains that may have caused at any point. I mean, I know the churches I've been involved in, that has been
I don't think it was any strain. I mean, it just kind of happened. But I do remember it was one, I can't even remember what the occasion was, but it was we were celebrating a Swedish Sunday, and I remember my dad played several things on the organ that were Swedish. And I remember after he was saying, we're done now. Now we are through, we're opening, we're letting everybody in. And there was one couple who were not Swedish. She was Italian, and I don't even know what her husband was. And they said, oh no, we like it, but they said, don't say it's done. But I think my dad, who loved the Swedish heritage, knew that it was sometime, to keep it, but not make it number one priority. It was time to move on.
going to mention about the Ladies' Aid. This was big years ago, but most of the mothers were stay-at-home moms. There were not too many mothers that worked. So Ladies' Aid was a big thing in all the churches. And I think the ladies would compete in the different churches and try to invite other ladies to come along well, I remember Carilyn came to Ladies' Aid and our son Philip, he was just a little shaver running around, you know, and everybody was, the ladies were fine coming out. It was down in the basement, and he came running down through there and he tripped, and who was it that he caused somebody to fall, and she ended up in the hospital. And she died, well, I don't, I think she was a start of her downfall, but anyway, Ladies' Aid was big then, and they raised a lot of money too for the church. So.
Wow, that sounds like a good thing statute of limitations exists here in Zion Covenant Church. You know. So, I just heard a tortious thing happening. Okay. So you weren't controlling Philip at that point. He falls, somebody falls, and he ultimately leads to their demise. Anybody else hear this? Yeah. Time has lapsed. Well, the Sunday school. I mean, we're talking about the fact that all of you are, most of you anyways, are products of that. What was it like way back when, and kind of what has been the directional change as far as outreach? You know, you want the Johnson boys. I mean, you're preachers' kids. You know, probably what was that like? First of all, that's a whole different mindset. When you're the preachers' kids, and not everybody turns out as well as you guys do. Wasn't that what I was supposed to say?
You could tell a few more stories about that. Let's not go there. Well, Sunday school, I remember a couple things. One thing I remember when I got my 5-year perfect attendance pin. Every Sunday, 5 years, never missed. And but Sunday school, I mean, it was just something we did, and other people attended, and it was important. And and we just all came, and it seemed like there were quite a few kids that came to it. So that was a very big part of growing up in Zion. I mean, for me, I grew up here, so this was kind of, forget Cindy said or whatever, but this is like a second home. I played here. I'm kind of like Mathis a little bit. You know, this is where I played and grew up, and so this is a very special place for me. And Sunday school was a big part of it.
Yeah, Sunday school was big back then. We had, I remember the kickoff Sundays in the fall, like kind of like what we had this morning. And each year moving up, you'd graduate to the next class, the next move. But Sunday school was very important to us. And I'm so thankful that we had the Sunday school that we did, because so many of the Bible stories that we learned from Gertrude Johnson and Phyllis Johnson and Joel Troxel and so many others, Ruth Wangstrom, so many of those people that meant so much, Donna Hedstrom, are just some names that come to mind, but all those that taught us year after year after year until we got into high school and confirmation in high school. So those were important times, and I'm so thankful that we had those opportunities to spend time with those people and learn from them and learn so many of the Bible stories that we've been able to pass on to our kids now as well.
If you go up into the upstairs of the education building and you see all of those Sunday school rooms, there was a reason for that, and each one of those represented a class. In fact, there were two of the larger rooms on that side that we ended up taking the center wall out to make bigger classrooms, but they were originally smaller classrooms, but they were all occupied. And then plus the ones in the basement for the small kids, all of those rooms were taken up by Sunday school, and there was an awful lot. And I do remember back in the old church when Cindy's grandpa, great-grandpa Gust, he was the superintendent, and there was a mention about perfect attendance. And there was one, Art Greenland, that just, he never missed. 31 years, I think, or something, he went with perfect attendance. And it was a big thing. But we used to, if you had a perfect attendance for the year, you would get a certificate about this, rolled up about this, like this, with a red ribbon around it. And then if the more you got, you'd get a gold stamp on it. But they would come in with armfuls of perfect attendance for the people that got these. And it was, like I said, it was a very big thing. And Cindy's great-grandpa there, Gus, was the superintendent, and I just remember him handing those things out to the kids.
Even when we were out of town, we'd have to get proof that we went to Sunday school. We'd have to come back with certificates that we had done.
We'd have notes from the Sunday school teachers at other churches, and we'd have to turn those. We get the lapel pin every year.
May I say something
A lot of
about
years of
Sunday
lapel
school?
pins. But that was the most embarrassing part of going to another church is, could we have a note saying that we were here? So we bring it back to our Sunday school teacher to prove we still have our perfect attendance.
Right alongside that, there was a picture in the paper that I have a copy of. Dad taught, Wes's dad, Cindy's dad, taught men's Sunday school class. And they were more than just a class. They did things together all the time for other people, and they just had, they had a good time together. But anyway, it was all about perfect attendance. And this one man was in the hospital at the time. So here's a picture of Dad. Pardon me?
It was Randy's uncle.
Who's uncle?
Randy's uncle.
Randy's uncle? Oh, okay. And he's in the hospital, and Dad went down and did the Sunday school lesson with a few of the other guys.
And then they're around the bed.
They're around the bed, so he could have his perfect attendance. It was really a big deal.
Anybody else have a Sunday school story? I like this. Good. I remember these things. You know, and then it's Sundays. What would it go? Literally from kindergarten through high school?
2s and 3s.
Till you were in Lynn's.
We had 35 in the choir room on Sunday mornings. We could have been on practice because there was a Sunday school class down there.
Okay. Then you guys, right now you have a preschool, which obviously you've now opened up beyond the church services, because Sunday school is Sunday school. It's Sunday school. Now you have preschool, which runs itself Monday through Fridays. At some point, somebody had to make a decision saying, we're going to expand beyond our normal Sunday outreach to not only outreach into the community, but outreach beyond during a week. How did that happen? Anybody, any remembrance of that? Preschool?
Some reference.
Oh, yes.
You must know, I taught and directed the preschool at First Covenant Church for 29 years.
That's that other church?
That's that other church.
That's that other
People
church.
would say to me, well, how can you go to both churches? Isn't that confusing? And I said, no, hey, I've got the best of two worlds. I know great Christian people at First Covenant and all the people that I know at Zion. Hey, this is great.
No, wait a minute. You know great Christian people at First Covenant and then other people at Zion. You're short, you're biased. Oh, gosh.
Okay, you're twisting my words.
We're going to do a replay here, just a second.
Anyway, Skip Hansen and Jan Dankovich started at the preschool here. And they had 110, and I think, I remember this because we had Bible school together. And 110 here and 186 we had at First Covenant. And there was a preschool Bible school that was really fun that I was doing at First Covenant. And I was attending here, this gets confusing because I'm talking about two places, but I was attending the CE board meeting one night and somebody said, Sally, we wish you'd do preschool Bible school over here. And I had just heard from the director of their children's ministries that day that they didn't want to do it anymore. And so we combined, I asked permission, and we put the two together, and we had, believe it or not, 269 preschoolers for our first combined preschool Bible school here. And somebody said, it must have driven you crazy. And I said, no, they were all just wonderful. They were just, I walked the halls and everything was in order and everybody had fun. One little kid stood at the back and he says, this has been the best day of my life. So, but anyway, we did things together too, so that was nice.
Have you ever thought about expanding? We 260-some preschool. You've got this building here. Is this seen expansions? Has this thing gone upwards?
Yes, it has, and we're full, aren't we? Completely full this year. And they not only have preschool, they have an after school, or aftercare, whatever they call it, so that they can stay till 5 or 5:30 when parents pick them up. So they're accommodating the working mother who gets out of work at 5 o'clock. So it's really a great program. They've worked really hard to make it go.
What about the sanctuary itself? What about this building? Has there been this particular footprint? Has this been the way it's been for some time? I mean, what you see is kind of what it was back in the...
This building, the footprint is nearly exactly as it was when it was built, except for the elevator shaft. I think that's the only thing that's been added. Otherwise,
Well, this is all different.
There were
things in the building have been renovated, but the footprint is the same.
Is that what the footprint is?
Yeah.
There were two rows of pews on each side that were removed when we made the improvements in the front. Our stage or platform area was very limited, and they wanted to get it bigger, and so in doing so, we lost a couple of pews there, and they're down in the choir room, all broken down and in pieces, so we still have them. But we're talking about outreach of the church, and a lot of effort has gone from this church to Mission Meadows. A lot of volunteer work has been done up there. We had a group that we went up to Alaska Christian College that we went up to work on. There have been groups that have gone down to New Orleans area for the Katrina, after the Katrina floods and everything. So I think there's been efforts to go outside of our church in that way too.
Personally, I'd like to commend, I believe, Zion Covenant. Mission Meadows, is that your baby?
Denomination.
Yeah. Because I think of so many of my own contemporaries, that really was their first exposure to Christian outreach, to a social setting, Chautauqua Lake, meeting folks of the opposite sex during programming and stuff like that. It was really quite remarkable. And so, what was the genesis of that? What Mission Meadows? Somebody wake up one morning and say, "Let's buy some land and build a camp."
There were 9 old men.
It's a story in itself.
So who has the Reader's Digest of that? I'm curious.
There was Hoger Nelson was on a committee to help try to find a spot around the lake. They wanted a camp. They used to go up to a place up Finley Lake was one of the camps, and then they had another one up on Lake Erie that they would go to. But we wanted our own, and so Hoger Nelson was one of the 9 men. He's been featured up at Mission Meadows, and they came across this piece of property up on the lake where it is, and Holger and somebody, Leon Anderson, I think the two of them from First Covenant, they ended up buying the property themselves or putting money down on it to secure it, because if the covenant or if the conference didn't want it, they would have sold it themselves or did something. But anyway, they were instrumental in securing the property, and it was farmland up to that point, but it has come a long ways.
Oh, it's remarkable. Sally, you got a story. You're just ready to talk about Mission Meadows.
I was at the first camp, And there was the dining hall was down where, let's see, what did I say? Down where the chapel is. That was where we met for services, and we ate down there. They had everything set up in that little thing. And then we were in tents, that just kind of swooped like this, and when it would rain, it would puddle. So you're underneath trying to push the the water off. And the trees were real spindly that they had there. Now they're big and beautiful. And I remember the water tasted like sulfur. Oh, and then we had outhouses the first year. So it's come a long way, but it's a wonderful, wonderful outreach to our community, to the kids in this area.
What's the relationship with North Park? My own recollection is when I played sports here, and football people, many of them belonged to Zion Covenant Church. They all seemingly went to North Park for their college. Never really. Is that a mission church?
North Park is our denomination's college university, and it was founded shortly after the denomination was founded in 1885, and the college not long after that. I think David Nivel was the. Does that sound right, Jay? David Nivel, I think, was the first professor there, sort of helped get that school going. Interesting part of the history of that is that Covenanters came out of a background of a lay renewal movement, so they were sort of suspect of learning, of education. And so North Park had a struggle for many years, education-wise, of just really valuing education. It took a long time for it to really be embraced by the whole denomination, but that is our denomination's college and seminary. It's in Chicago, if you don't know.
Yeah, North Park actually was a junior college for quite a few years before it became a four-year school. So I know my dad went to North Park for 2 years, and then most of those kids would go on to Augustana College, which was across the state in Rock Island. And he actually got his bachelor's degree from Augustana, and then went back to North Park for seminary. But that's what a lot of them did back then.
It's so similar to what my family's experience was, because they have Bethel College in Minneapolis was the Baptist, analogous to North Park. As you look forward now, here we are in 2018, you've all had varied experiences. I mean, you're of various ages. Why don't we go all the way over to you, Kathy, because I want to make sure we give you a lot of airtime here. Since you came in, what do you see as sort of not only your own personal experience, but kind of the vision of this place? And if you want to comment also, I've observed a real effort made by the church, or maybe I'm in a little bit unique position to not have to watch it from a spectator viewpoint. Dealing with the issues of diversity. The church coming to grips with the community, which is incredibly diverse, church community, which is not as diverse historically, and kind of that's changed. So maybe you could all talk a little bit about that, because that really is kind of a future challenge.
It certainly is, and Pastor Rick's been helping us grapple with that, because our church doesn't necessarily look like our community, and yet we want to be welcoming to all. And so, like so many churches, we are looking for ways to reach into the community and help people feel welcome here. And I think urban outreach in the summer, when people have volunteered to go downtown and help with feeding programs, our preschool program that brings in so many families, but of course, generally middle-class families. We are looking for ways to reach into the community, but it happens, and it happens slowly, and it happens by building bridges. The recovery program that was initiated probably around the time that Rick came, 2007, was probably the closest we've come to really feeling a part of the city and seeing many different diverse peoples come to our church. There was an Alpha program at that time that helped people with questions about Christianity really come here and feel free to ask those questions. So that was an amazing time. We hope to kind of find our niche, but it seems that God keeps bringing us back to families. We've had a rich history with families and encouraging good family life, and it seems that, especially with our preschool right now, we're seeing many families interested in faith and wanting to know more about how to integrate faith into their family life. And that's really how I came here. As a young mother, wanting to raise children in faith, my husband and I found a home here, a place where we could learn about how to do that and to also understand how to grow in our faith. So we have a rich history. And part of why I'm here is that I was on the council for a while during a lot of our growth time, especially through recovery. But since then, I've had a passion for prayer. And Zion has a wonderful history of prayer. I mean, so much of the development of why the buildings even occurred was to share Christ, and that happens through a relationship with Him. So prayer here is very meaningful. It has always been terribly important, and I think now we're trying to make it more visible so that it's not just personal, but so that people realize that talking to God can happen anywhere and is part of our relationship. So that's a new heartfelt cry that we have here at Zion, and we hope that it's something that will grow and take hold so that everybody will feel a part of worship, and that's something that can be shared with a neighbor. It's not something that is just kept to yourself. So it's a good way of reaching out.
Keller?
Zion to me, I don't know if this is what you really want, but Zion to me has been a home away from home. You can count on people. You don't even have to know what's going on. You could just say, put a hug, give you a hug, and I'm praying for you. I mean, you're not ashamed to say that. I've had so many people say, well, several people say, they've come to something. They came to my husband's funeral. If I was going to a church, I would pick Zion. You were so friendly. You were so open. You smile. You don't have to start a big conversation.
Hope, and pray that Zion will continue in the work that she's doing, and our programs that have worked in the past maybe sometimes don't always hold the same thing in the future. So you got to critique what you've done, and hopefully and prayerfully it brings more people to come. One thing, I hope we never lose our focus, and our focus is our Lord Jesus Christ. And that's the most important, that we keep Him in front of our eyes and not count numbers. That's not important. Of course we want large numbers. But of course the thing is, if they come, that they're hearing the Word of God. That's the most important. And that's my prayer for Zion.
Sally?
I'd love to see all kinds of colors and people, different races, and coming together and working together to know Christ and make Him known. That's what we claim as our motto, but that's the direction that we want, to know Christ, completely make Him known to others. And we can do that through our love for others and sharing, being willing to share verbally as well as actions with other people, and just bringing them in. I mean, one year for Bible school, I had 17 kids that made a decision for Christ, and there was nothing more wonderful than that. But to just spread God's love in this community, in service and just the way we live, and just being not afraid to turn conversations to spiritual matters and be really witnesses for Christ, but at the same time being sensitive to the people that we're talking to too.
I think every church these days struggles with how to be more effective in their neighborhood, how to increase their membership, to make it look like they're doing something for the Lord. I think every church is struggling with those things, and you can't rely just on programs and coffee and biscuits and that type of thing. But I think if the word is preached, the gospel is preached, and it's true to the Bible, and we get that from Rick, I think we have to stay with the basics, stay with what works, and hope that God will make the increase. And if you can be that lighthouse in the neighborhood and in the community, I think most churches want to do that. And maybe it's part of the times that we live in, the latter times when a falling away from the church. That's part of the Bible too. And so we struggle with that, and lots of churches do. So it's not an easy task to be in the leadership of the church, to be the pastor, to be even on the board and trying to figure out what to do. It's not an easy task.
We are going to have coffee and biscuits afterwards, right? Just want to know we haven't fallen away from that, are we? Okay. Bruce?
Zion's always been known for having good food and good fellowship. So my vision for Zion is like so many others. In one sense, I wish that we were still down in Jamestown. I mean, the old church that I first attended here was right where the Jamestown High School swimming pool is right now. So if you don't know exactly where, that's where the Zion that I first encountered was for a short period of time before moving to this church. In one sense, it'd be great if we were still down there, because we would have been right in the heartbeat of an area that needs so much outreach. And we could have been really instrumental in helping in that area. But I don't think it was wrong back in the early 60s when we moved out here, because so much of Jamestown has moved into the Lakewood area. When we came out here, there wasn't that much out here past Zion. And now look at the way Lakewood has expanded and all the way down, all the way out on the lake. So I think there are exciting things for us at Zion to look forward to, and many outreaches that the Lord will provide for us in the future as well.
Yeah, I just envision this place has been such a welcoming place and such a home for me that I just hope that continues, and I know it will. And I just think, we just keep expressing God's love. It's all about God's love. That's all there is to it. We just have to love everyone and make them feel welcome here. So that's what I'd like to say.
I'll just echo some of the things that were said already. Obviously, the importance of keeping the main thing, Christ, and continuing to faithfully preach God's word in this place, and loving people. And along with that, really what we're going through right now as a congregation, this vitality pathway, it's about being intentional, about being a healthy missional church, and that doesn't happen by accident. It really means that we need to be intentional about how we are light in our community. And Zion has a long history of that, and I trust that it will into the future. If I can just say one more thing just before I just end. I won't be here in 10 years, probably. I won't be pastor here in 10 years. And hopefully my ministry is planting seeds for the future as well. But I also know that I'm building on what others have done before me. Mentioned recovery ministry a few moments ago. I don't think that would have happened if Brad Bergfolk hadn't preceded me, because he had a heart for outreach in the community and wanted to see this church become more diverse. And if I can go back even further than that, I wish I had had more time to get to know Alden, because the more that I hear about him and his ministry and his heart, I think he is the guy that probably paved the way for this church, having really being welcoming, being inclusive, being outreach-minded. I think of his services in the parking lot. I mean, Alden did some cutting-edge things for his day. And again, in preparing for tonight, I was reading through some things up in the Heritage Room. Alden was on a racial relation. He was president of a racial relationship committee here in Jamestown to deal with racial tensions in the late 60s. In Jamestown, I mean, Alden was doing that. So here we are, 40 years later, 50 years later, same issues, but all that to say that there have been others here who, I think it's in our DNA, but at the same time, we need to be intentional about outreach, however the future looks. I don't care about numbers, but that this church continues to be vital, and I think as long as it is vital, you won't have to worry about numbers. So that's it.
I think that's the final word. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Now we're going to have coffee and bulla, and now you can ask the questions you're afraid to ask.
Can we thank Greg one more time for being here?